Thank you for joining Wars of the Roses. And this is Television and the Subconscious Mind by Manly P. Hall. An article taken from Horizon, the magazine of useful and intelligent living, Volume 17, Number 1, Summer 1957. Television and the Subconscious Mind by Manly P. Hall. Popular inventions have greatly changed the American way of life in the last 50 years. It would be almost impossible, for example, to estimate the changes brought about by the automobile. Perhaps an outstanding result of rapid personal transportation has been the decentralization of living. This, in turn, has certainly provided the average individual with more pleasant home surroundings and enabled him to escape from the restrictions imposed by horse and carriage. His new mode of travel, while highly useful, has not proved an unqualified blessing. A speed and power mania has caused the accident rate to reach monstrous proportions. And we're killing and maiming on our public highways more persons than have been war casualties over the same period of time. Needless to say, the increasing congestion, leading to the most gigantic program of roads and freeways ever attempted by man, is also taking a heavy toll on the nervous resources of the average citizen. The resulting changes in political, industrial, cultural, and physical habits have altered the foundations of our entire society. To a less obvious, but perhaps no less significant degree, air transportation has wrought its transformation on both national and international levels. Countless smaller devices have strongly modified home and business conditions, and all these alterations have required psychological acceptance and adjustment. Motion pictures and the radio have set up habit mechanisms with both constructive and destructive consequences. And last, but by no means least, we have television, which, though still a precocious infant in the sphere of new and useful devices, is exerting an undue influence in the shaping of human conduct. Altogether, the average individual is being bombarded by so many highly directional conveniences and commodities that his mental-emotional orientation is seriously disturbed. Because his personal integration is not strong enough to permit him to direct constructively the facilities now at his disposal, he is showing distinct signs of maladjustment and insecurity, as nearly all of his scientific appliances have been highly commercialized, and the manufacture, distribution and sale of these articles have become an essential part of our national industry. It is difficult, if not actually impossible, to create and apply rational codes which will prevent abuse and protect the citizen from his own lack of discrimination and common sense. Over the last several years, a number of articles have appeared in the public press indicating general dissatisfaction over the quality of television programs. Thoughtful parents have been alarmed by the panorama of violence and delinquency to which their children are daily exposed. Most viewers resent the commercials and many of the products which they endorse. Still others are offended by the trivia which passes for light entertainment. And educators in general feel that a valuable means of public improvement is being wasted and perverted. To date, the emphasis has been largely upon the effect of television on the younger age groups. But this by no means represents the total picture. It may well be that the danger is greater and the adverse effects more consistent on the level of the adult audience. It cannot be denied that the majority of persons are affected for better or for worse by environmental factors. In the old days of the legitimate theatre, the number of theatre-goers was limited and available entertainment was not abundant, except perhaps in a few metropolitan areas. The motion picture had a vast audience, but except in the case of the film addict, there was a tendency to level off to 1 or 2 shows a week. In smaller communities, the movie theatres usually played the same film for 3 or 4 days. Also, an amount of discrimination was possible without demanding too much of human nature. The viewer selected what he wanted to see, was loyal to certain stars, and expressed his disapproval by staying at home. With the coming of radio, entertainment began to move into the home, but it was limited to the auditory sense. The program was heard but not seen, and the great listening audience frequently divided activities. Folks could listen while engaged in various occupations. And the programs themselves had to be adjusted so as to convey their meanings principally by words, supported by a few rather simple sound effects. Television, however, caters to the most powerful of human faculties, the sense of sight. The eyes and the ears together receive the full impact of the program. Furthermore, the viewer must give himself totally to whatever he is witnessing. He must sit facing the instrument in a dimly lighted room, receptive to everything good, bad, and indifferent that is present for his amusement. Surely he can turn from one channel to another or give up in disgust, but he generally finds that he watches longer than he intended to, faithful to a level of amusement for which he can find little excuse within himself. The economic factor plays quite a part. We all like to feel that we are getting something for nothing. After all, we have bought the instrument, and it is easier to depend upon it for recreation than to drive through heavy traffic to some motion picture theater, pay a ridiculously high price for admission and probably an additional parking fee. We also like to think that television keeps the family together, amuses the children, and offers some cultural advantages. There are newscasts, sports events, weather reports, old movies with nostalgic overtones, quiz programs, and even an occasional sermon. Altogether, we stress the educational advantages, although valuable or useful information is only incidental. It is so easy and so convenient that the habit is allowed to grow and intensify. And now the millions of viewers are looking forward to color television, which is supposed to open another world of glorious adventure. We must assume, therefore, that programs of one kind or another are being channeled into the millions of American homes every day, and the members of families are individually or collectively exposed regularly and systematically to a totally unplanned bill of fare. A hodgepodge of visual impacts, which have as their one primary objective the advertisement of products distributed by the sponsor. There is no concern over what people should see. The first consideration is to give them whatever will cause them to turn on the program and endure the commercials. Apart from such features as may be considered standard and which are broadly non-directive, television entertainment divides into two rather clearly defined classifications. The first may be considered entertainment for adolescents. This covers everything from the traditional horse opera, mystery stories, detective yarns, and horror tales. This bill of fare also includes narrative and episode epics that continue year after year, light comedy and the factual or semi-factual dramatizations based upon police records or international espionage files. Some of the stories are pleasant and rich with family incident and humor, others are fantastic, and still others depend upon violence to maintain interest. Broadly speaking, the more sanguine of these productions have excited much of the criticism directed against television programs. There is some foundation for the prevailing attitude, but like so much public criticism, it appears to me to be superficial and inadequate. It is doubtful if the proverbial stagecoach robbery or the bad man in the border town is the cause of serious consequences. Such programs, extending into the field of mystery or even the horror picture, are not the larger cause for alarm. These productions are, for the most part, utterly outside the experience of the television audience. We are not in the days of the Texas Desperado, nor can we take one of Frankenstein's descendants too seriously. It is difficult to forget that these stories are contrived, or at least have slight bearing upon our daily conduct. We may suffer the occasional nightmare, but even children today are rather too sophisticated to be profoundly damaged. It is about time that someone began to examine what we call the better programs, the mature entertainment, the high art which it is hoped and believed will add to the dignity and survival of this mode of entertainment. These important shows form together the second group to which we have referred. They are well written, ably directed, and proficiently acted by good casts. They are selected frequently because of themes considered socially significant. Many of the stories are completely believable, leaving the viewer with the conviction that they are truthful and represent incidents that could occur to his neighbor and even to himself. The audience is flattered because these adult productions imply a mature group of viewers who appreciate the better things of life. There's no doubt that some of the plays presented and sponsored by reputable organizations are highly commendable, yet for the most part they are built upon a deep philosophy of disillusionment. They subtly but insistently convey the impression that the world is filled with insidious human beings dedicated to selfishness and genteel conspiracy. They influence our estimation not only of our friends but of strangers around us. They transform our world into a morbid sphere of troubles and continuously recall the inhumanity hiding beneath the surface of our apparently placid culture. Some will argue that everyone should see dramatic works of this kind in order that he may take a realistic attitude on the subject of human behavior. What we would like to convey at this point is that our level of serious television drama is essentially unhealthy, suffering from the same ailments noticeable in art, music, and the legitimate theatre. Less and less frequently we turn from our entertainment refreshed and inspired. In fact, today we consider the program trivial unless it stirs us to some kind of emotional tension. Psychologically speaking, it is good drama, so-called, which can most deeply injure us. We can survive the momentary horrors of some vampire tale much more easily than a top performance of Ibsen's Ghosts. No terrors of a wax museum or some monster from outer space can stir our deepest fears or place us under the same profound anxiety as the scene in which a normal human being is gradually transformed into a helpless and hopeless maniac because of the transmission of hereditary venereal disease. It is outside the point to stress the grand moral lesson or to insist that the total play has constructive ethical overtones. The quiet, gentlemanly husband slowly poisoning his wife may give a wonderful opportunity for an outstanding performance, but the better the acting, the deeper the impression upon the subconscious minds of the beholders. With programs of this kind flowing into the home every day, it is inevitable that unstable persons will be adversely affected. It is also useless to sit in an ivory tower, talk about great art, and imply that the wrong kind of people should not watch the program. I personally know a number of neurotic television owners who could only be kept from such plays and stories by physical restraint. To these folks, comedy offerings are trash, travelogues are dull and uninteresting. Western stories, detective mysteries are boring. They must have the heaviest, most involved emotional situations that can be found on any of the channels. They twist their dials back and forth until they find some heartbreaking domestic triangle with some poor suffering mortal desperately struggling against inevitables. This is the program for the evening. Every tragic detail is absorbed with a strange, unnatural relish, and the consequences are almost immediately reflected in the personal environment. The viewer is moody and depressed, ready to hate races, groups, classes, and eager to discover, if possible, some parallel between himself and the sufferer on the screen. We may as well face the simple fact that the adult television audience is not composed of mature, healthy persons with happy minds and well-balanced emotions. 2/3 of the middle-aged TV addicts are themselves psychically immature or immediately susceptible to negative and destructive influences. The average home is not a strong and secure institution, but rather precariously poised on an uncertain foundation. Adult relationships are not dominated by faith and hope and charity. The very way of life that has constantly catered to selfishness, fault-finding, and dissatisfaction is producing a generation of frustrated mortals loaded with complexes, phobias, and inhibitions. Psychological drama is no release for these individuals. They have already reached that degree in which they resent optimism, cheerfulness, or constructive indoctrination. They have instinctively chosen to aggravate their own symptoms. They want to believe that the world is a hateful and malicious sphere of which they are the constant and hopeless victims. In the course of a year of carefully choosing neurotic entertainment, perhaps supported by an occasional book written by some frustrated soul or an avowed degenerate, these actually sick men and women relentlessly destroy whatever healthy thinking or creative emotion may still lurk within them. They will not tell you that this happens, but it is easy to watch them turn to the television as the alcoholic turns to his bottle, or the narcotics addict to his heroin or cocaine. Behind the avalanche of problem stories lies the conviction that has burdened both American and European theatre for several generations. It is the worship of realism, the doctrine that the worst must be true and that the truth must be told. Morbid sensationalism is box office success. The sick go to watch the sick, and even the actor himself may be adversely affected by his own roles. The best-selling book is nearly always one which contains objectionable elements. Perhaps it does expose an existing evil, and likely enough the public should know the facts. Under such conditions, however, we are no longer in the sphere of entertainment, but rather on the level of education. Essential knowledge should be communicated factually and without the glamorization of degeneracy and delinquency. Not long ago, a physician told me that he had built a craft shop in his garage with which to entertain himself and seek needed relaxation. He said he never turned on television because he could see no advantage in working with the sick all day and watching them all night. Of course, a great deal depends on presentation. A clinical program may be very interesting and informative to the public. It should not, however, be half truth and half fiction. It should not twist and distort, leading in the end to a false evaluation of data. Naturally, an occasional program that is not essentially sound would probably have slight effect. To see a problem motion picture once a month, or a heavy play once or twice a year, establishes no pattern, and the sordid implications would be counteracted by numerous incidents occurring in the daily life of the person. We all know the psychological importance of repetition. The same level of literary taste forced upon us every day over a period of months indoctrinates us finally with the prevailing temperament of modern art. This art is the direct result of war, depression, and insecurity. It has led to a broad intellectual despondency which reappears in countless forms, but is always essentially the same. Realistic drama encourages, in fact, forces the spectator to identify himself with the story. His identification is usually negative because he is morose and frustrated in himself. By the end of an evening of such alleged entertainment, he remembers nearly every misfortune which has ever occurred to him and finds new grounds for many of his deepest frustrations. This point was driven home to me not long ago when I was watching a television production in which a badly neglected child was developing hysterical tendencies. Before the picture was finished, the life of the child was hopelessly ruined by parental discord. A neighbor's child was among the television audience as the story unfolded, and suddenly the little girl broke into uncontrollable sobbing, bordering on hysteria. She got up and ran out of the room, exclaiming, "That's just the way Daddy treats Mama!" The child had sense enough to leave, but the adults remained, their attention glued to the screen, absorbing every unhealthful detail with intense satisfaction. It seems to me that this cannot be good and must contribute considerably to the increasing mental disturbance that is reported throughout the nation. On another evening, I used the station listings and checked what were presented as the worthwhile offerings. There were 5 plays and playlets, apart from ancient films, which we will ignore. One of the plays was really delightful, for in this case, a serious effort was made to portray an elder relative whose contact with his young family helped him to find new interests and activities in living. He became a really constructive influence and found himself enjoying better health and a larger circle of friends and acquaintances. You left the program feeling better and hoping that when you grew old, you would do as well. The other 4 programs were all morbid. One, a perjured witness in court wrecking innocent lives. Another, an escaped maniac from an asylum terrorizing a simple family. Another, a triangle in which all persons involved were unfaithful and despicable. There's no reason to take the Pollyanna attitude toward life, but we cannot solve our problems by merely perpetuating real or imaginary delinquency. What kind of people, then, watch these television shows? The immediate answer must be all kinds of people, most of them impressionable to some degree. We know that the stress and tension of our way of life is undermining both physical health and mental perspective. We are becoming more tired, irritable, and worried with each passing day. We are best off through some reasonably constructive escapist mechanism, which means that entertainment should help us to get our minds off ourselves and onto some constructive level, which inspires us to improve our natures and overcome our difficulties by the best uses of our available internal resources. Fortunately, most of the so-called adult entertainment is over the heads of children. Unless they have had particularly unfortunate experiences, these problem tangles are beyond their comprehension. They still turn back lovingly to the jalopy race or the baseball game or one of their interplanetary heroes. It is the person suffering from the delusion that he is mature and that he will not be affected by what he sees who is most likely to be further disturbed. The root of the trouble is not in the television station, nor the sponsor, nor the actor, nor even the writer. It is the broad intellectual sophistication that we have come to regard as fashionable and as complete proof that we are emancipated from the romanticism and sentimentalism of the Victorian age. We must prove that we are grown up by renouncing idealism as a sickly byproduct of what the communists might call imperialistic capitalism. Certainly there is misery in the world. We should know about it, we should consider it, and so far as we can, we should work diligently to bring about needed changes and reforms. We should never lose sight, however, of the fact that the majority of human beings are essentially decent, law-abiding, well-intentioned, but tired and irritable. These folks want to do what is right, and they would like to have as much encouragement as possible. That is, they think so. The line of greatest resistance, of course, is that which indicates the way of positive growth. We instinctively cater to our weaknesses, even when we know that the policy is wrong. On the other hand, we are slaves of fashion and do not intentionally depart from that which is socially acceptable. Living has given the average person few incentives to be noble, idealistic, and altruistic. Yet he has preserved these attributes deep within himself. If we want better homes and happier families, we should do everything possible to restore humanity's faith in humanity. We should point out more of the fine, unselfish, and truly adventurous experiences, which can be just as interesting and just as dramatically satisfying as murder, madness, and crime. Why should we always choose our entertainment from the comparatively small circle of outstanding moral derelicts? Why should artists prefer models from the underworld of Paris, or paint the human body as something distorted, deformed, or monstrously proportioned? Have we not learned that if we expose man's ugliness long enough, he will accept it, will stop questioning it, and eventually acknowledge it as a new standard of beauty? We cannot afford to have him subconsciously decide that corruption is natural or inevitable and eternal, for if he does, he will finally conclude that it is commendable. All the world cannot be wrong to the person who depends entirely upon others for his attitudes and opinions. As decadent art is morally dangerous, so is decadent entertainment. Adolf Hitler undermined a highly educated, highly advanced German culture by continuously and relentlessly appealing to the worst side of the nature of his people. While it might not be appropriate to make such a comparison, I think there is an important point. If we keep on emphasizing only the worst and disseminating this emphasis throughout society by daily messages of restatement, a lasting effect should be and must be expected. Highly impressionable audiences will be influenced and will gradually come to believe that these mature and ably produced dramas are the true story and authentic record of man's behavior in this contemporary world. Such an insidious condition is definitely detrimental to public welfare. Although psychodrama is recognized as a valid means of instruction and adjustment, the present craze for psychological drama is not sound, even in terms of mental therapy. The public is incapable of evaluating correctly fragments selected at random from an immense field of research which is still technically, largely theoretical. The instinct to use isolated experiences as a means for self-analysis can lead to serious errors of judgment. May we suggest, therefore, that the more thoughtful television viewer impose some censorship upon his own selection of entertainment. When he observes that programs have a tendency to stimulate emotional moods or intensify negative attitudes, they should be discontinued in favor of more constructive material. Also, be mindful of members of the family who are under tension or have neurotic tendencies, and try to prevent such persons from developing the habit of choosing such types of stories for purposes of amusement. Practically every activity which interested families prior to the development of television is being neglected. There are numerous diversions far more satisfying to the mind and more suitable to creative emotional expression than watching the almost constant panorama of human misfortunes, discontents, and disasters, and such larger and more beneficial activities should be cultivated and encouraged. Like so many other inventions, television can be a useful servant, but a dangerous master. It should be used not to perpetuate and excite our neurotic tendencies, but to advance our positive thinking. Thank you for watching, and please don't forget to share, like, subscribe, and comment. And if you can, please consider donating to Wars of the Roses. Links to PayPal and Patreon are in the description. Thank you so very much.